Sisters. And she is a product of the struggle as well, as her grandfather was involved in the anti-apartheid movement. So we have to give this sister reverence for choosing Sankofa out of all places in Washington, D.C. to be tonight. And she's going to lay some poetry on us later. Her name is Siki Dangla, and she is an American University student. Well, first, she's a South African activist. That's her first. That's what she was first. All right, don't get it twisted. Don't get it twisted. Secondly, well, for now at least, until she graduates and uses her tools to go on to the next step, she is a political communications graduate student at American University, right across Black Park, everybody. Let's give her a hand. Alright, family, are you guys ready to get this show on the road? Let me get a All Eyes on DC. Yeah!
Yeah!
Oh, that's the loudest one ever. Let me get another one. Let me get an All Eyes on DC. Alright, beautiful, 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 beautiful. Let's open the show up. My South African sister, if you can come to the stage and just lay some words of poetry on us tonight. Let's give her a hand, everybody.
Thank you. I'll start. I've got like a little short greeting that I kind of wrote before. So first, no drums for the first one and then for the second one. So my name is Sigelelwa Danga. Sigelelwa means be blessed. Sigelelwa. But you can call me Siki, it's alright. And so I quickly jotted something before I came because I've been sent by South Africa because we regard that our struggle, you know, when injustice, there's injustice here, it's injustice to us. And by the way, this is the first night I've actually felt like I'm in America. And it's my favorite place.
All right.
Dear, this is like a letter from South Africa to you. Dear African who has gone missing for hundreds of years from Africa, we are sick with longing for you. Dear African who is American by force, dear African who became American by choosing to live again and again and again. Dear children of resurrection, dear children of Harriet Tubman and Nat Turner, dear people who took us to the moon and back, dear moonwalkers, wake up angels of Harriet Tubman, Asikat baby. Wake up Nat Turner's troops, wake up one more time for a final victory dance and song, Vugani Asikat baby. Dear God of Martin Luther King Jr., have the final say, the story is not yet done. Dear Son of God, we know what it is to suffer, and we know what it is to die. Our Father in heaven, give us this day resurrection life as our daily bread. Dear Holy Spirit, wake us up to your power. Wake us up to the power inside of us. I come humbly as a South African, praying for our brothers and sisters. An injury to you is an injury to us. Thank you.
Really?
Okay. Now I'm starting. This poem is called Black Lives Matter, Dead or Alive. I wrote it in response to the African gravesite that was desecrated. That's, Sis Marsha's busy, the Church of Macedonia, they're fighting for that land. You will not commercialize our graves as though we are dead. Handle our bed of death with care, lest the ground you walk on revolves beneath your feet. Our bones, though dry beneath the earth, are a matter of the future. We have been waiting to be woken up from our sleep. Our business on earth is not yet done. We have been longing for an opportunity to state our case. America shackled us, but our debts freed us. Now we are alive. Like dust, we were while we lived. Now we are a hurricane of justice sweeping across this land. We are an army, and this is our final fight. Every black life killed joins the army of witnesses to testify. Every death is a piercing cry that rings eternally, amplifying our voices. We have no master but our Creator. We are free to insist on justice. Death has lost its fear factor. Today we are ready to produce evidence. Our bones are title deeds. Our voices will be a storm inside your soul. You will hear us in your sleep. You will smell us in your food. You will find no peace until rightness is triumphant. The prison walls will be silent no more as they testify against your evil deeds. The prison gates will become gates of salvation as they free our sons from your corruption. The system will declare that Black Lives Matter, alive or dead. Your bullets will tremble inside your guns, refusing to shoot the innocent. Black Lives Matter, alive or dead. Every unjust death is one more soldier added to the army. We are the army of dry bones. We gather by the graves. When our peace has been disrupted, we rise. We have made death lose its sting, using it to amplify our voices which you think do not matter. God's tongue takes no pleasure in the bitter taste of our unjust deaths. His eyes move to and fro, searching for the lovers of his justice. They will bring rest to the people, rest to the land. Look up, just ones, and you will see the great cloud of witnesses. Open your ears, and you will hear the testimonies of the sleeping giants of Africa. There is no loss in your cause for justice, only eternal gains. Let the wind from God's lips call the army of dry bones to life. Can you not hear the rhythm of your African ancestors marching? Can you not feel resurrection power giving life to your body? Your sigh is a prayer for peace. Every death is a cry for justice. You are one step closer to a win of many generations. The dead anticipate their victory with laughter. Black Lives Matter. The dead cannot lose. Amanda.
Let's give her another hand. Let's give her another hand. Many thanks for that opening. It's very, very reassuring knowing that there are people all around the world who think, of course we already know this, but seeing it in action, knowing that there are like-minded people who are on the same wavelength around the world doing the same thing is always reassuring. So we appreciate you bringing your good spirits to Sankofa and to Washington, D.C. Alright, our headliner for tonight is none other than Miss Michelle Mabson. As she walks up to the stage, I'm going to read her bio. And Michelle Mabson is a passionate advocate for healthy and sustainable conditions for all. She strives to incorporate principles of environmental justice into all of her efforts, bearing in mind our need to protect the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we consume, the places we live, and the climatic conditions that have allowed our species to thrive. Currently, Michelle works at the intersection of public health, environmental policy, and law as a staff scientist at an environmental law firm in D.C. She's also a board member of a community-based advocacy organization dedicated to eradicating health risks that children and families face from lead exposure across the United States. Michelle holds a dual master's in public policy and public health, master's in science from the University of Michigan, and is a graduate of Howard University. In her free time, she enjoys dancing, running, hiking, volunteering, hanging with her girlfriends, reading books and blogs, traveling, and exploring the DC area. Michelle Matson, family, let's give her a hand. All right, perfect. So as we start this interview, I'm kindly asking that we pass the sign-in sheet around. This is, and I know there's a pen out there, my apologies, but this is a way pretty much for us to keep in contact with All Eyes on DC. Michelle, very nice to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So before we begin, well, actually, as we begin, if you can just talk more about your work with a community-based advocacy organization, I believe is Black Voice for Flint.
Yes.
Okay, please talk more about that.
Okay, so thank you everyone who is here. I'm really glad to be here, and I'll jump right into Black Millennials for Flint. We're a civil rights and environmental justice organization, and I think it's important to point that out because clean air, clean water, those are all human rights, and they're civil rights that we actively are fighting for, campaigning for, and industries for. And so really Black Millennials for Flint, as it might sound, was actually the impetus was understanding the plight of our brothers and sisters in Flint following the Flint water crisis. And so initially our goal was to provide direct resources, so we collected water, baby wipes, sanitary wipes, things that people might need since they could not access water, clean water readily. And I will point out that over 3 years later, people are still not able to use their water. People have to travel to take showers. This is because there's, one, a distrust of some of the water that has been tested and shown that it still contains lead. As well as people whose water heaters have yet to be replaced by the state. So this water from Flint was corrosive, and it corroded the ability for these water heaters to be to work. So people are still waiting to have that replaced. So Flint is it's not a thing of the past in terms of the issues that are going on, and so we're still actively involved with the community there. And when you start to dissect the pieces of things that are happening in Flint, it's not just that there was lead in the water, it's that there's corruption within the local government, there are acts of environmental racism that have been going on there for many years. And so really the nail on the head was this, that we found out that there's lead in the water. And I'd also like to point out that in working with community groups, we realized that this issue had been going on for much longer than the media and health officials were actually, and when they actually got involved, it had been going on for at least a year, close to 2 years. And so that's all to say, this community has been going through a lot in terms of, again, trusting the government and still needing to get access to clean water. And when you peel that back further, you realize that there are communities all across our country, including DC, including Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Los Angeles, all over the country where we're dealing with lead issues. So we quickly realized that instead of just being reactive and wanting to provide direct resources, that we also need to provide education to communities about how they can also help to eradicate lead, not just in water, but in our soil, lead that gets into our home from dust and paint, lead that gets into our bodies from ingestion of food that may contain lead or consumer products that contain lead. So we're really looking at eradicating lead holistically across our country. It's something that does not belong in our bodies, and we have to compel our government and our spaces that really need to provide the money to get it out. That's something that we're doing at the legislative level as well. So we are a small group of folks, so we collaborate with other organizations to get our work done. We collaborate with community groups on the ground as well as churches, because these are the areas where they're providing direct resources in places like Flint, or in the other cities that we might work in, like Pittsburgh, for instance, working with some of the local officials to raise awareness of the work of the issues.
So what I'm hearing here is that after you saw the problem, you understood what caused it or what was prolonging elected officials from fixing it, and so you made sort of a grassroots solution to attack it legislatively, or is that one of the ways that you're thinking about doing it?
Yeah, so we are not part of that community, and we would yield to the expertise of those the community groups that have already been on the ground. But in terms of the legislative work that we've done, it has been more focused in DC.
Yes,
since most of us are residents of DC. Really when Flint broke, if you will, when we realized that there was this lead issue in Flint, we realized that issue was again across the country and including in our schools. We may not be able to control the lead that's going into people's homes, that's private property, but schools are places that our children are, usually they're public facilities. So that's something that the DC government can actually have control over. And so when the city started testing the schools and found out that yes, lead exists in the water and started shutting down water fountains and other sources, there's obviously a need to remediate at that point. And to pass laws and make sure that other facilities, not just schools, but anywhere that children can be, because lead is a toxin that mainly affects children in the sense that it is a neurodevelopmental toxin, meaning it can cause things like ADHD, other sorts of developmental issues. So it's integral that we prevent it from getting into our children's bodies in the first place. So again, we work in DC more locally in terms of legislative work.
And from what I understand, there was something on the table or something that was moving forward, and you guys, Black Millennials for Flint, or at least your associates, you guys had a hand in making that happen.
Right, so pushing again the city council, and I'll shout out to some of my members who are here. So we were, he deserves, definitely deserves that.
Let's give him a clap.
So yes, we work with the council to make sure that this bill passed. It's basically again to make sure that public facilities, charter schools, other areas that again children might frequent are not only tested, but that there is proper documentation that people can see, so that if anyone sees that something like a fountain, let's say, shut down, they know exactly why, and then providing resources to actually remediate the problem, so clean up the lead and make sure that these drinking water sources are clear from lead once and for all, basically.
So I asked that question just to make a point about public policy and about in our distrust of the U.S. government of Babylon, we often forego looking at policy to solve our problems. And I think that this is a wonderful testament to how interacting with legislation independently as a self-determined source rather than as, a puppet, so to say, of either just any entity that doesn't have your best interest in mind. Doing stuff independently, engaging the system independently has benefits. And this shows the benefit of All Eyes on DC, really highlighting solutions to our problems. So we gotta give her a hand for that, y'all. This is policy in action, y'all. Let's give her a hand. Now, Michelle. So we're gonna pivot, to the affected areas of Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Irma. Right now, of course, we've always been talking about the causes, but now people have lost their homes. What are the prospects of those affected, mainly those people of African descent, the original people, right? What are the prospects of them returning to their homes or pretty much getting placed in conditions that are safe, that have clean water, that have clean air, things like that?
So I think the reality is that this is going to take a much longer time than anyone can anticipate in terms of the cleanup actions and getting people back into their homes safely. People came back to their homes and quickly realized that the flooding caused mold and other kinds of things that you will see when you have a very wet area. But not only that, I think pesticides that have been in people's homes, so things that we use, the house cleaners, things of that nature, but also Houston deals with a bunch of toxic waste facilities that are surrounding communities. Unfortunately, there are not clear zoning laws, so literally an oil refinery is right up on the fence line of communities. And that's a daily situation that people have been dealing with as far as the more so chemical disasters that have also been the outcome of Harvey. So literally the water didn't just come and recede and now things are good. Again, people are dealing with the aftermath of their homes having to be needing to be dried out, needing for the state to come in and make sure that it's actually safe for people to move back. Of course, homes were destroyed completely as well. What we can remember from the 2005 Hurricane Katrina is that when people were placed in these FEMA-sponsored trailers as sort of this temporary housing, we realized that actually the materials that these trailers were built with were actually toxic to people too. So we have to learn from our past, obviously. Somebody said it. I mean, we found this out after the fact. This was not, this was something that could have been prevented, but people, even after having gone through the travesty of losing their home, moved into something that provided by the government that was also harming them. And so I think that there's, at least in the case of the aftermath of Harvey and Irma, and understanding that there needs to be long-term solutions that we seek. We can't rebuild necessarily the same way that we built our homes before, because we should not think that these storms were uncommon, that they are only going to happen once in a while. We understand that they're going to continue to happen. So when we're rebuilding, people have to, the infrastructure has to be built differently as well. And there has to be more community cohesion, and making sure that people can get out of their homes when evacuations occur, making sure that we care about our neighbors and those who may have an inability to get somewhere to safer ground, to higher ground.
So when you say vulnerable areas, what are the characteristics of a vulnerable area as far as just like proximity to the disaster or the line where the disaster comes, access to transportation, and even or even just the amount of people who need care, so like babies and elderly people. What are the characteristics as you see it of a place that is vulnerable?
I mean, I think you definitely have described that quite well. I'll add again the community cohesion part, so understanding that there need to be social networks that allow for people to get in touch with their neighbors readily, as well as their officials who are making these sorts of warnings. I'll point out with Harvey, for instance, that because these communities have been living on the fence line of oil refineries and toxic sites for so long, something like a disaster like Harvey was, while it wasn't expected, in terms of the severity, it can be underestimated, because you're literally dealing with the potential of a threat every single day. Whether it's a threat that something is going to spill over, or a toxic emission from these, from the flare-off from some of these facilities. So that's to say people have been living in constant fear. And that's from actual accounts of residents in the Manchester and Port Arthur community in Texas. And so these folks, they're not necessarily new to the idea that there is a disaster impending, but also there has to be mechanisms in place to make sure people can get out, that they can, and then also come home and be able to rebuild. And so I think really the only thing I would have pointed out is the community cohesion and social networks that needs to be strengthened for sure.
Yeah, and like that's a very good point that you bring up, and you know, you put that right next to the government assistance piece. We look to the government so often, but it's often those government resources that end up pretty much biting us in the backside, you know, in the very end. The social cohesion piece, how does that work in a community where people can't really afford to even take care of themselves, where like they're already at the bottom of the economic totem pole, so to say?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually very complex, because there's other higher order needs like access to food and actual healthy food. There's, again, dealing with sickness that comes from living in these kinds of communities where cancer and asthma rates are much more elevated than in other communities. So you're dealing with other burdens aside from just this big facility that's blooming every single day. So what it does look like is, I think, advocacy. It looks like making sure that when there's something else that, let's say, is going to be cited in the community, because like, you can trust and believe that when this rebuilding is happening and these facilities need to operate again, they're going to want to operate just as business as usual, and that's not okay. We cannot let that happen. And when I say we, I do mean us, even though we are not in that place. We have to recognize that we have agency as well. We can provide that. We can make sure that we are aware of the kinds of things that are going to be problematic as people, again, move back into their homes. They have other things that are worries. And so I think it's important that we're informed as well and do what we can even from afar. But also making sure, again, that those networks are fortified. Like, you cannot not know your neighbor. And I know that's really common. You know, we don't all know the people who are living next to us. But when it comes to knowing, well, whose house might be safer when it comes to a flood, or where can I go that's higher ground, those are the kinds of things that we need to be keeping in mind, because, again, these storms aren't going anywhere. They're going to happen again.
So it's sort of like practicing for the inevitable and just being war ready, in a sense.
Pretty much, yes. In advance, proactive.
Wow. It's pretty unfortunate, but that's a reality of life, as we mentioned with nature earlier. You know, just it being peaceful at times and other times just reacting. From what you understand, how far in advance did people know about the impending hurricane?
I wouldn't have given it more than a week or two. We knew the hurricane was coming, but there have been other hurricanes that weren't quite as strong. The impacts could not have been understood in advance. And then by the time evacuation happens, highways are packed. People are still trying to figure out where can they go on a moment's notice with children or, again, elderly. And so, you really have to, and then what if it passed? What if, again, it wasn't as bad and you spent all that money preparing? So there's a lot of angst around, well, how's the best way to respond? We knew the storm was coming, I'd say, for some weeks, at least from the meteorological standpoint. But just the severity of it, that was just a couple of days in advance that people realized, like, this is exactly where the storm's going to hit, and this is probably how severe it will be.
And this has been a trend for a pretty long time now, just these storms getting more severe, would you say?
Yeah, I would agree. This would have been considered a 500-year storm, except that in the last decade we've seen more than close to a dozen of these across our country. In terms of, again, the kind of hurricanes that come from being tropical storms and get upgraded to a category 3, 4, or 5.
So, do you predict that we'll see, because you said business as usual when it came to the plants up and running again after they clean everything out. What do you predict as far as, the so-called officials or experts making that connection between the two? The plants and the other types of, man-made creations and just the frequency of these storms.
So I think that's up to the state and it's up to our federal government. But this administration has already shown that it does not have a desire to address the kinds of needs that we're going to be seeing in communities like this, where, again, these more severe, more intense, and more frequent storms and the kind of damage that they're going to wreak on the economy in and of itself, we're not seeing that translate in terms of the kind of policies that would force industries to either so let's say you're a real estate developer, you want to build again, you can still build the exact same kind of facilities, exact same kind of buildings without remand from the government. So we as folks in the community, that's pretty hard to control, but we can still hold our officials accountable to that. We can say, no, that's not the kind of, again, business as usual approach that will work, because in just a couple more years, we might see the same kind of damage and be rebuilding again. And no community wants to be having to rebuild every couple years, or be to the point that it's too devastated to be rebuilt, too decimated to be rebuilt.
What kind of political mojo do you think the elected officials in this country can work now? Now that the storm has hit, it's an opportune time. You already see that people got Trump acting so-called liberal with this DACA and attaching it to the hurricane funding. But as far as attaching hurricane funding to something that looks like a bill that would force the government to pay more attention to the environment, what are the prospects of that?
I'd say the prospects are dismal, unfortunately, because we see the rollbacks of policies that would help to fortify against these storms. I'll give two examples. One, the flood insurance program that allows relief for those people whose homes were flooded was about to sunset. Literally, the program was going to come to an end at the end of, I think, this month, in fact. So who knows about the timing and whether or not this was telling for us, but we quickly realized we need billions of more dollars in that kind of program, and we cannot just let it sunset and not have money in the Federal Reserve to make sure that we can provide for people whose homes have been flooded. Another program is such that under the Obama administration, there's an infrastructural bill that, again, would have forced companies, in order to get permits to build in communities that are in flood zones, to build higher, just 3 feet, maybe about the height of this table higher, and that would make a huge difference in terms of the kind of flooding that it can mitigate. Well, the Trump administration rolled back that order as well. So we are not seeing that this administration is going to be proactive. And in fact, it seems to be trending in a way where it's going to be more detrimental for communities in the future, because it's really about what are these companies going to make in the short term. When they rebuild, they'll make a lot of money from the real estate and the investment, and then get to rebuild again, essentially, once these storms happen.
Perfect. I have a couple more questions before we get to our intermission, and I introduce our intermission musical guest for the night. This question is touching on a bit of the science, which we will continue on after our next performance. But if you can just talk to us about the creation of a hurricane, if possible. You know, what is, I'm not too familiar with it. From what I understand, it's like heat, and what is making these hurricanes stronger, specifically?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. They're very fascinating, and I will not purport to be a meteorologist or somebody who deals with these systems. But from what I do understand, all of the hurricanes that typically we get the impacts from in the United States actually originate off the coast of West Africa. And there's sort of this convergence from the Sahara Desert of this very warm and dry air, and then air coming from, I want to say also from the south that's actually colder, and that kind of creates this perfect storm for these hurricanes to form. The other piece of that is heat. So the heat from the ocean is what sort of drives these hurricanes to be able to get stronger, and also, of course, the current is what ends up bringing it closer to going through the Caribbean and going through to hitting the Gulf. So you have the current that's bringing it closer and closer and end up hitting the United States, but it's the warming water, and we have water that's warmer than ever seen on record at this point, and again, that's literally energy for these storms. And that's why I say we're not going to see that these storms are anomalies in any sense of the word, but that they're going to be able to continue to get stronger, go from tropical storms, which are a lot less severe, to being more frequently hurricanes, like we see with Irma and Jose, and as well as Harvey.
Wow. Let's give Sister Michelle a hand, fam.
Thank you, sister.
This is the beauty of the job. The geek in me is just jumping with joy. Seriously.
You'll geek you.
Telling you. Proud geek of dad. Okay, at this point, we're going to give Sister Michelle a break, and we're going to allow our musical guests to take the stage. I'm going to introduce them real quick because they deserve a very, very beautiful introduction. You should know more about them. So you've more than likely seen them around the community. They've earned their stripes. They're still earning their stripes, and they're teaching us a lot about activism, about the power of the drum, right? And about the power of song in articulating our struggle then and now, okay? Yes, please play the drums as I introduce this group, if you don't mind. All right, we're going to slice it up real quick. All right. The Black Workers Chorus is the voice of those who will not be silenced by the intimidation of power politics. When Brooklyn Manor residents were under siege by sophisticated government-awarded contract developers, the Black Workers Chorus sang songs of change interactively with its supporters in English and in Spanish. You might see them anywhere outside of the Wilson Building, forums, and events. This chorus is comprised of people from all walks of life, races, colors, and creeds. The Black Workers Chorus is directed by native Washingtonian, renowned social justice advocate, folk musician, and All Eyes on DC supporter, Mama Lucy Murphy.
While the Black Workers Chorus come forward, I'd like to say that the Black Workers Center